European history scholars. Mr. Sherman here, a little laid back on a Saturday morning, got my favorite coffee, ready to talk about some wars of religion. My goal is to present you with information that is going to help you understand the information that you're getting from the textbook, reiterate how that supports the key concepts, and just give you some valuable information on our wars of religion. This first of two videos on the wars of religion is going to focus on France. So, it's going to be as if I was presenting it virtually to you online through our Google Meets, which means there's probably going to be technical difficulties. There's going to be dramatic mispronunciations, misspeakings, because, that's what I do, and I want to get a sense that we're kind of live together. So, get prepared. If you think you got the information from the textbook and your notes and you think it makes sense, then, hey, you don't have to watch. If you want a little bit of a refresher, or, hey, let's just kind of see if I can get the bigger picture put together, then watch, right? If you want to hit on your YouTube right below, 1.5 speed me up a little bit, hey, that's the power. You're in control in this virtual learning. I probably will be doing very few edits to this video, so that's going to add to the fun as well. So sit back, enjoy, perhaps have your workbook out, your key concept workbook, and let's take a look and see if we can make sense to some of this information on the French wars of religion. I'm going to kind of still hang out here in the corner, so I keep my eyes on you, making sure that you're paying attention. So again, we're going to focus on two major conflicts in our wars of religion. But you notice, I got this question mark, like, are they really wars of religion? We are going to use religion as a motivation, but what other factors are in there? And then when we look at the bigger picture, what else can we take from these wars other than Catholics fighting Protestants? What political angle is coming in, right? Are kings, are monarchs trying to maintain control? Or are there groups of other powerful entities, nobility, perhaps the lowest of the low, peasants? How are they getting involved, right? Well, how will they be impacted? So there's lots of factors. We're going to start with some religious connotations, right? That sets the stage a little bit, but there's lots of different angles in these wars. And so it's going to help us put this big picture together. So again, we begin with our civil war in France. You know that in our key concepts, it's specifically laid out. We're focusing on key concept 1.2, right? Remember 1.2, the big picture, talks about religious pluralism, challenging this concept of a unified Europe. Get a little bit more specifically, now we're talking about these conflicts. Conflicts among religious groups overlapped with political and economic competition within and among states. Very similar to what I just said. There's going to be more than just religion, but we will use religion as a motivating factor to get some of these economic and political desires that we have. Let's get a little bit more specifically. What brings us down to France? Why do we need to know this French Civil War, aka French Wars of Religion? These issues of religious reform exasperated the conflicts between the monarchy and the nobility, as in the French Wars of Religion. So we're going to use this example as France because what we see in this age of new monarchies, you read just a little bit about how our monarchs are becoming a little bit more modern during this age. With changes to our monarchy comes conflicts with nobles, rich, powerful families who want political power, who also, more importantly, fear losing political power. And so therefore will take actions to try to maintain what power they have. We also see, in a little bit more specific, that these French Wars of Religion will help us understand that states exploited religious conflicts to promote political and economic interests. both of these specific parts of key concept 1.23 we can gain a better appreciation for them by understanding the French Wars of Religion. Okay? So, these key concepts also help us understand, and there's some, look at that right away, some bad editing on my PowerPoint. Okay? Hey, technical difficulties. We fly with it, man. It's 2020, baby. We just roll with the punches a little bit. Okay? So, maybe I'll fix it, maybe I won't, but I think we can see it. The other big thing with these key concepts, remember that key concepts, there are learning objectives. They're labeled in your reading terms. Many of you probably just ignore them, but it's a good idea to look at them once in a while. What exactly do we need to know? What do these key concepts help me learn? All right, so specific learning objectives. You should be able to, at the end of this unit, explain how and why religious belief and practices changed from 1450 to 1648. Our whole conversation about Martin Luther, that fills in with this objective as well. There's lots of key concepts that are going to help us do this. We know how religious beliefs and practices are changing. But now what's going to happen in France? How can I use how religious practices are going to change in France to help me understand this objective as well? Also, learning objective C, can you explain? How do we explain things? More than one sentence, right? How can we explain how matters of religion influenced and were influenced by political factors from 1450 to 1648? So we are going to see that today. There are a lot of political factors that are going to enter into our knowledge bank here, dealing with our French Wars of Religion. So we got to know these key concepts. These key concepts help us achieve learning objectives, all trying to fit together. Okay, that's what we're here for, to try to see if we can indeed prove that we have learned something along the way. Now, an important historical skill that's very evident in all your AP history classes, but in any history, and honestly, it's a skill that we need in life as well. We are going to specifically talk about these French Wars of Religion, but we need to understand what is happening around Europe at this time so we can understand a little bit better. That's called contextualization. Can you understand the bigger picture of what's happening to explain why things happen the way they did in France? So, what I'm going to do, this bad metaphor that I've been using for years, but I kind of like it because look at me, I like to eat. Okay, so think of the French Civil War. We are going to have ourselves a meal of a French Civil War, and since it's French, it's gonna be fancy, right? No offense to anybody of French, genealogy or whatever, but I said no offense, so you can't get offended now when I go, right? So we're gonna set the table. We're gonna have a nice meal. Okay, so contextualization, setting the table. What are we going to have? So, some key things that you need to understand that's happening around Europe. We're pulling out the fancy china. Come on. French cuisine, probably going to have some snails. Right? Our plate, the fancy china, stuff that we only usually use on special occasions. That plate is going to be the Peace of Augsburg. The Peace of Augsburg is a very important term, event, that you need to understand. We, in our conversation, we know about Martin Luther, right? You know that many people within the Holy Roman Empire are turning towards Martin Luther's interpretation of Scripture, moving away from the Catholic Church. What happens within the Holy Roman Empire is eventually these German princes, and there's enough of them that want to choose Luther, that there's conflict within the Holy Roman Empire. So to avoid an all-out civil war early on in the Holy Roman Empire, because we're going to get to a war within the Holy Roman Empire, within the Holy Roman Empire, the princes come to an agreement, a treaty, and it's known as the Peace of Augsburg. This very significant settlement makes Lutheranism legal. The Peace of Augsburg, you've read about it, I hope, but you need to know it. The Peace of Augsburg allows the rulers of the land within the Holy Roman Empire to choose the religion of their kingdom. If I choose Lutheranism, my kingdom is Lutheran. If there are Catholics within my kingdom that want to remain Catholic, then I have to let them leave. I have to let them move to a kingdom where that prince has chosen Catholicism. So, that's pretty significant, right? Because a lot of people are tied to the land. And so, in many ways, especially peasants, right, you're kind of tied to land. You never feel that you get to leave. This settlement says because of religious reasons, you can now leave. It makes Lutheranism legal. So, we are going to talk a little bit about this Protestant group in France. They want the Peace of Augsburg, okay? This is going to be a conflict of the desire to get what they have in the Holy Roman Empire. Okay? Hey, this is a fancy meal, so we got to kind of understand this context a little bit as well, right? You know, when you sit down for a really fancy meal, if you've ever get the chance to a real fancy meal, sometimes there's this fork at the top of the plate, right? And everybody's like, what the heck is that fork for? That's a perfect example of the Anabaptists. Nobody really knows, or should we use this fork? Remember, these Anabaptists, this is a group that wants to be completely separate. Are they critical to our knowledge of the French wars of religion? Probably not. But it's kind of fun to do this fancy little fork. But you do kind of need to understand that there is this Protestant group that kind of wants to be okay with separation. They want to be kind of separated from society. They keep us in our own little communities. Use us whenever we have that course that ever that fork is used for. And I don't know. I've never had that fancy of a meal. What kind of meals do I have? I have meals that are involved with forks and knives and spoons. Let's screw that up over there. All right. So the battle in this case, right? We need to understand this bigger picture of the battle between the fork and the spoon, the Catholics and the Calvinists. Our Calvinists, remember, religion established by John Calvin, who took what Martin Luther was doing and said, I kind of like it. I've got a little bit different interpretation. We've got this predetermination concept that, again, John Calvin kind of introduced, but his followers took it to a whole new level, right? That's what really separates them from Lutherans and definitely separates them from Catholics as well. Coffee break. We know, like, what kind of meal are we going to have? Is this going to be a fork type of meal, or is this going to be a spoon type of meal? The Catholics sitting over here, understanding what's happening with these challenges to them. They have their own Counter-Reformation, or the Catholic Reformation, where they will indeed attempt to make some reforms, but they will also double down on some of their teachings, and so they're not going to go without a fight, okay? They want to have some soup at this meal. They want to dominate that, hey, gruel has worked for hundreds of years, let's make sure that we can continue to have some gruel. You need your spoon, okay? There's lots of differences in how they handle it. Calvinists don't have a pope, Catholics have a pope, so we definitely have a conflict here between our Protestants and our Catholics. The last thing that we need, the utensil, is surprise, I ruined it earlier, is the economy. We've got some economic problems going on in France. We know that in the work that we've done from last unit, we're involved in the price revolution. So nothing exasperates conflicts more than economic turmoil. So in many ways, you could say economic problems spread throughout France. Really? Get it? Spread the knife. Okay. Or you could say, hey, it just cuts through to the chase. I got knife puns, and I don't even know if pun is the right word for it. All right. So, but we have some economic problems. Do you need to know all of them? Not necessarily, because you actually do, right? So therefore you do need to know them. Oh my God, Mr. Sherman, take more coffee, right? We understand that we, in Europe and France, is affected by this greatly. The population has increased. We are actually increasing, and it's outstripping many of our available resources, which then means, hey, there's more competition for resources, which means prices go up. People aren't making as much money as they were before. So when nobles and monarchs aren't making much money, they turn to the peasants. Peasants are peasants, and they never really have enough money. So, right? So we see this conflict. What we will also see is then religious groups will kind of exploit this religion or this economic problems to help them. Okay? So, just know that we have economic problems. So our table is kind of set. Okay? We're ready to eat. We know that there's problems between Protestants and Catholics. We've got an economic crisis, and we want a meal that perhaps could give us legalized Calvinism or some religious toleration. But it's not a fancy meal unless we can set the mood. Well, it's fancy meal, so in Europe, like, we're allowed to drink some wine. Okay? It's not America, so, young guys, if we're having a metaphorical meal, come on, sit down, we're going to have some wine. Our wine, in this case, are known as the Huguenots. This is vintage Huguenots, 1520. Mr. Sherman, what's a Huguenot? A Huguenot is a French Calvinist. So I explained to you Calvinism. You got a little bit of understanding of what Calvinism is. But now we're going to focus on the French vintage of Huguenots, all right, or Calvinists, and that is our Huguenots. In 1521, roughly around there's about 2,000 bottles, let's say, of Huguenots out there. It's about, and they're on the rise, okay? So they're continuing to grow. They will eventually end up, as this war breaks out, to be about 7% of the population. Now, what's important about this is 2/5 of the French aristocracy, the upper echelon society, those that have a little bit more money and political influence, are turning towards Calvinism, right? So 2/5 of our French aristocracy are Huguenots. That's going to be significantly important as we get to understand this war. Okay? So, we're almost done. We got this meal set. Now we just got to set the mood. It's candlelight, right? It's borderline romantic. Our candlelight, or what is really going to set the mood for a war, is the death of a king. We will understand that in this course, when a king dies, chaos, perhaps, changes emerge. Now, Henry II was the last of our powerful monarchs, right? We'll talk a little bit about him. But he tragically dies. Now, he does his job as a king. He's got some heirs. But when his death, we lose a strong ruler, and we've got some young kings coming up. And so that's going to set the stage for a war to break out. Okay? If you read a little bit about Henry II dies in kind of a tragic accident. He's got a couple daughters, and we're going to marry those off because, that's what kings do with their daughters. They marry them off. And so at the celebration of his daughter's marriage, I think she was getting married to the son of Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire because, that's what monarchs do. Big party broke out, having some lancing, fun stuff monarchs do, right? And everybody's like, all right, Henry, that was good. You've done a good job. And he's like, one more. Let's just get one more. Everybody's like, no, that's enough. And so, unfortunately, we always do that one more. And during the lancing accident, big shard of wood comes off the lance, drives it through his eye, thus beginning the phrase, it's all fun and games until the king gets his eye cut out. I don't know if that's where that phrase comes from. I just kind of made that up. All right. But you've heard that phrase before. So, regardless, all right, takes one to the head and, dies. So.
Something.
Yeah, we got something, Homer. It's time to eat.
Yeah, Ray, I'll stab you with a Q-tip.
All right, that was a little bit over the line, Homer. Just pay attention. Okay, so what we are going to get in this French Civil War is really the end of the Valois family, or as they say in France, no, they probably say Valois. Okay, at the end of it, we're starting the infamous monarchy, the dynasty of the Bourbons, but our Valois as at the end. Henry II, before he got lanced in the eye, was the last of our powerful kings. He had, remember, right, Machiavelli says, do whatever you have to do to stay in power. For a king, especially the King of France, that means you better have a son. You better have an heir. Now, Henry does very good job in his kingly duties. He has Francis II, who's his heir, but then I got a spare to the heir in Charles, and then I got my spare to the heir in Henry III. And good thing he does, because all three of these have Roman numerals behind them. And if you get Roman numerals behind your name, probably means that you were a king at one time. Also remember that he has two daughters. One just got married off. Another one's coming up a little bit later. It's going to be critically important. The wife, his wife, is going to be another name that's going to be very important, right? So we can refer to her as the wife, but most importantly, you need to understand that she is the mother of these three sons. She understands that these sons are all going to come to rule at a very young age. They need to be influenced, and she desperately wants to keep them in power. This queen mother is Catherine de Medici. What did you say? Medici? Yep. That Medici family, right? Man, these guys, they're everywhere. This family is everywhere. The Medicis are kind of like some cool people, except for Leo, right? Like that Leo Pope, dude, man, you're terrible, Leo. Okay, so you see way down here in the corner, bottom left, okay, is Catherine. You can follow the family line up the thing. Okay, so Catherine de Medici. Okay, all right. Say to yourself now, one class already answered this question, but the other class, right? Anybody know where that theme song comes from? Kind of helps me understand Catherine de Medici. Couple things that we need to know about Catherine de Medici. She is a good queen mother, right? She is going to do whatever she has to do to make sure that her sons stay in charge of France, okay? At times, she's extremely hated by different groups throughout France, right? Oh my God, you know about the Medicis. They're not real royal blood. They work for a living. Well, kind of, right? Remember, these were bankers. Ew, right? We can trace, they actually earned their money through corruption and all that stuff or whatever, but they're not like monarchs, right? So sometimes she's referred to as, she's just a shopkeeper's daughter, right? Now, come on, Medicis are pretty good shopkeepers, right? As we get going, she is going to develop a pretty reputation for cruelty. She kind of goes after anybody. She sometimes referred to as the wicked Italian queen. That's that little dig at her to not even say, not only are you not a monarch, you're not even French. Right? Some French snobbery coming out there. But the second bullet is going to be an important vocab word. Catherine de Medici is what we are going to refer to as a politique. She's going to do whatever she has to do to keep her sons in power. And so we have referred to that as Machiavellian. That's a good way to refer to it. But now, especially as we will see when you add some religion into the mix, you're going to have this new term known as politique. I will compromise my religion if it means I can stay in political power. So, politique, our wicked Italian queen. With Dad being now dead, right, the crown now moves to Francis II. He's the heir. He's the oldest son, okay? He comes to age, or he comes to the throne at a very young age, right? He is, through arranged marriage, his wife is Mary Stuart. Mary Stuart, again, so many cool stories about Mary Stuart, right? Mary Stuart has a very interesting life. Mary Stuart will eventually become known as Mary Queen of Scots, who will eventually get in an issue with Elizabeth I in France, right? And so she's kind of, she's got a great life. Maybe in this picture I had a hard time figuring out which one was Francis and which one was Mary, because, all right? But he's the king of France at the age of 15, and now she's the queen of France, right? But as young teenagers or mid-teenagers, they're not really ready to rule. So Catherine de Medici is in the background kind of running things, okay? Mary, just a little bit because, oh my God, it's Mary, Queen of Scots, right? We got to talk a little bit about her. Her father was James V of Scotland. When he dies, she actually is the rightful ruler to be of Scotland, but she's like 6 months old or something like that. And so her life was in danger, so Mom, who, her mother was Mary Guise, gonna know that family coming up here, sends her off to France to live, where she kind of comes of age, is very well adapted into French culture. So this is not a crazy marriage. She's from a powerful family. She's got some royal connections. This is a good marriage. Unfortunately, Francis dies. Okay, he dies of infection. A lot of people say maybe he died from huge hand disorder. My God, look at the size of that boy's hands, right? He was always cold because they couldn't figure out a pair of gloves to fit him. Okay, but eventually it's not really why he dies, but he does die. And so then there's poor Mary, a widow by the age of 18, and so back off to Scotland she goes. She will be married 2 more times. Very interesting marriages. Husband number 2 does give her a son. That son, James, will eventually go on to be the King of Scotland and the King of England. Story for another time. And then husband number 2 dies mysteriously in an explosion, or maybe if he didn't die in an explosion, he was strangled right after the explosion. Was she involved? Was she not involved? I don't know, right? That's Mary, Queen of Scots. And then eventually she's found guilty of plotting to kill Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, in a kind of little cousin spat a little bit, and she was executed in 1587. But it wasn't just any execution. The guy who was meant to cut her head off kind of missed the first time, and then I'm just saying there probably had to be a little sawing involved at the end. So, poor Mary. Too bad she couldn't have stayed married to the old big hand Frank here, right? Okay, so, in our French Wars of Religion, this is where that key concept, political sides, come in, right? The sides that you need to know in our French Civil War are these powerful families known as the Guises. These are our Catholics. And the Bourbons. These are Huguenots, okay? Both of these groups are fighting to gain royal inheritance or influence with the French monarchy. Both of these noble families want to get their family in there. It's almost like they see the decline of the Valois, and so they want to make sure that they will be in the right spot when the Valois dynasty ends. Okay? The Guise family are very well connected across Europe. They've got really good Catholic connections. Most specifically is with Philip II of Spain. We don't hear a lot about Spain anymore, but you're going to encounter Philip II's name. What you need to know about Philip II of Spain is ultra Catholic. He is big time Catholic, and he feels it is his mission to make sure Catholicism is protected everywhere. So he'll send money, he'll send whatever he has to do to help the Guise family keep Catholicism in France. Okay? And then add in the new Jesuits that have emerged during this time. Pretty aggressive group of Catholics that want to preserve Catholicism. They've got some good connections within the Guise family. Our Bourbons, heavily Calvinist, right? Pretty powerful, wealthy family. They have a lot of influence in the central and southern parts of France. And so again, we can kind of see why this will eventually move into civil war. The rivalry between these two families, right? This is where that key concept of religion exasperates political issues, right? So the rivalry between the Guise and the Huguenots, this almost like a family feud, will undermine Catherine and her sons, and will eventually pave the way for the end of the Valois dynasty. All right, so as our war gets started, now, what you will notice about in our course, right? Like, you're not going to get a ton of questions on specific battles of the French Civil War, okay? Oftentimes we don't do very specific battles, right? Now every teenage boy, he's like, oh my God, I've been playing Call of Duty my whole life waiting for this. Now you're telling me we don't have to know these battles, right? Like, you just take your Call of Duty data and knowledge and just kind of move on with your life, right? We are more interested in like bigger events, okay? But as this war breaks out, remember, it should not come as a surprise to you, right? If we were all in class, like the question I would ask you all, and I'm going to ask you now because, still doing it, all right? Do people do crazy things in the name of their religion? Yes, right? We know that, right? Religion gets people fired up. So, the Guise are one guy, Francis, right now, there's a lot of Francises in France. Okay? It's a great name, by the way. So Francis, in this, Catholic desire and also desire to have political power, like he orders the execution of any Huguenot he can get or his people can get their hands on. Okay. And then they were also notorious in these French civil wars to every time they killed somebody, they would erect a white cross, or they would have crosses all over their lands to make sure that you knew that this was Catholic land. And if you were a Huguenot in Catholic land, your life was in danger. Okay, so these aren't just little battles that we're talking about. We're talking eventually thousands of people being killed in the name of religion, but the underline is it's also helping me politically. Okay, so we see oftentimes you'll hear references, or perhaps you'll see references in your future study of history, to these crosses across France, and a lot of times they represent, hey, that's Catholic land, but it also represents, hey, there might have been a lot of Protestants killed here as well. Okay. Francis, this war breaks out, and there's about a series of couple little battles over the next couple years. Our Francis, our Duke of Guise, not the Francis King of England or King of France. Oh my God. Take a drink of coffee. We'll eventually find him on the wrong end of an assassination. And so what happens when you get assassinated in one of Mr. Sherman's PowerPoints? You die a screaming death. Okay? This assassination of a high-ranking member of the Guise family just adds more fuel to the fire. Okay? Additional fuel to the fire is the fact that these three sons, right? Francis got married, but he dies without an heir. Normally, that would create chaos, but thanks to Henry II's, be careful how I say thanks to what, whatever. Remember, he's got that spare to the heir, okay? But, as we will see, the next two sons also die without heirs, right? So this never knowing exactly who is the long-term successor to the Valois family also undermines their authority. And it also creates openings for the Bourbons and the Guise to continue to fight for influence. Okay. So now, I'm going to give you a bunch of details here, and you don't really need to know them. But what you need to know about our Catherine is she, remember, is going to do whatever she has to do to stay in power. Which that means is she will oftentimes, she's never going to stop being Catholic. She's an Italian shopkeeper, for goodness sakes, right? But she will at times lean Protestant, okay? So, sometimes throughout these battles, right, she will play both sides. She's going to do whatever she has to do. So sometimes she's siding with the Bourbons, right? Sometimes she's more Catholics. Now, as the Catholics are winning, hey, I'm all about the Catholics. But now the Bourbons are gaining a little bit more influence. So she comes in and she says, hey, you know what? I'm going to make a little peace settlement. Let's kind of end some war. This one, not important. Don't feel like you got to write it down, but just understand that at times she's going to make a treaty or make deals to try to ease the conflict and the killing, right? So this very first treaty, the Saint-Germain, right? It gives acknowledgement to the Protestant nobility and grants them some religious freedoms within their territories. But then the Guise are going to be all like, oh, we can't have that. So she's like, yeah, just kidding. We're going to ease back on that. I'm all Catholic. I'm all Catholic all the time. And now I got this new son in the place. This is Charles, right? He's the new king of France. And Charles was like, Mom, maybe we should kind of lean a little bit towards the Protestant. You know what? Spain's sitting down there and they're pretty heavily Catholic. What if they get so Catholic that they take us off? Maybe we should support some other Protestants around the world. So they eventually support the Dutch Protestants who had rebelled against Spanish authority. And so now all of a sudden they're like, hey, I'm doing that. And then his mom's like, dude, we can't do that, right? Now the Guise are all mad and think that the Protestants were gaining influence over the monarchy and slowly but surely taking over France. And then Catherine and Charles eventually see it as collusion, of course, with Spain, and one which depleted monarchy treasury could not be supported. And then Catherine desperately wants a Catholic France. Now all of a sudden she's Catholic, but not a Guise Catholic France, so now she's going back over here, right? So whatever she's got to do, it's like, oh my God. Make a decision, lady. Thanks, Homer. You totally should have. I just should have played that one first, right? Do you need to know everything I just said in the last 30 seconds? Absolutely not. But what do you need to know is Catherine de Medici is a politique, and she's gonna bounce back and forth to do whatever she has to do to keep her sons in power. So, one of the last decisions that she does, right? Actually, she'll make some more decisions, but a critical decision that she makes in a time where she is leaning towards the Protestants, she says, perhaps if I can marry off my daughter, I already married off the older daughter, right? Now I've got another daughter, okay, Margaret. Perhaps I can marry her off to a Bourbon and maybe get them to kind of ease up, okay? I'll still kind of deal with the Guise family, but perhaps a marriage will put things together, right? Sounds like a great idea. Unfortunately, this marriage will end in one of the most infamous events of the French Civil War. Now, this is an event that you will have to know. I'm not exactly sure why, but in times in the past, this has been a popular subject for the College Board. Right? The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. It occurs 4 days after the wedding of Catherine de' Medici's daughter, Margaret, to Henry, one of the Bourbon sons. Okay? Again, remember, this was a marriage to try to ease tensions. Well, the Guise are like, oh, we can't have this. Right? So they get to Charles, and they're like, dude, your mom made a mistake. We know that this wedding and this big celebration, because every monarchy or every royal wedding is going to be a party, this is just a plot for the Bourbons to come in and kill you because you're the heir, right? They're going to kill you and then probably kill your little brother, probably kill your mom, probably even kill your dog because, you know, that's what they do, right? And so Charles is like, oh? And he's like, goes to mom, he's like, oh, mama. I don't know what the French say for mom. They probably say, oh, right? And they're like, hey, I think this has been a big mistake, right? And so mom's like, well, do what you gotta do. So he says, all right, when they arrive, let's just kill the leadership. And so Charles orders the execution of any Bourbon leadership that we can. Okay, during one of the attacks, the new Duke of Guise, right, kills a high-ranking Bourbon Huguenot, throws his corpse out the window, right? Then the French people go crazy with the dead body. Then they castrate the dead body. They drag it through the dusty streets of Paris. Children start playing with it like it's on, like Donkey Kong, right? And so what you end up with is a period of days that's an absolute slaughter, right? It becomes legal in France to kill anybody that you think is a heretic, right? So for Catholics, that's anybody that speaks against him, right? So in Paris and outside of Paris, right, starting on August 24th, 1572, you get over 20,000 Huguenots or suspected Huguenots, right? We don't even know if they were truly all part of the Calvinist faith, right? Like you can put this label of heresy on anybody, okay? It was an absolute bloodbath, okay? But Henry of Navarre, the man whose wedding started all of this, escaped and he survived. Going to be very significant as we will see, right? So I'm still married. I still have a connection to the Valois family, right? Like I'm married to your daughter. I'm in the line of hierarchy and I survived. But unfortunately, many other people do not, right? Here's the very famous painting of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Hey, you guys remember St. Bartholomew? Remember in our conversation about Michelangelo's painting on the Sistine Chapel of the dude that was skinned alive, but we put Michelangelo's face on it? That's St. Bartholomew. Okay, cool little story thing. All right, so you can imagine the chaos. Your book does actually a nice job of describing this picture. The Pope, when he gets word of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, he loves it, right? He actually has a special mass celebrating the deaths of these 20,000 Huguenots, right? Like, religious tensions make you kind of do some crazy things. All right, we're almost done. I promise. Okay? it's hard to say. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre does not end our Civil War. Okay? Unfortunately, Charles dies in 1574. Okay? And now third son, the spare to the heir, comes into play. Okay? Both Charles and Henry III's, right? I don't know why I decided to use an I for this Henry. Maybe to try to separate Henry III with Henry of Navarre. My God. Like, somebody go by Hank here, will you? But what we really need to know, okay? Charles dies with no son. Henry III comes to the throne. He rules for 15 years. He has no son. So when they die, who's next in the Valois family? That's Margaret. But because this is France, Margaret can't rule, but Margaret's husband can rule. And so thus, that's how we will get the Bourbon dynasty. Okay? So, the conflict continues. It breaks out into two sides, right? Instead of maybe looking at it as the Guise versus the Bourbons, now we kind of start referring to it as the Catholic League. This is, you're going to get outside support from Spain. You're going to get influence and support from the Pope and the Protestant Union. As a part of the Protestant Union, you're probably going to get some help from the Holy Roman Empire, the northern kingdoms. So the Bourbons are gaining some support as well. Okay? So, eventually, Henry of Navarre, the leader of the Bourbons, but remember, connected to the Valois family, will eventually defeat the Catholic League, and when Henry III dies, takes over as the rightful heir and begins his reign as the King of France, right? Now understand what that means. The Bourbons won. Does France all of a sudden become a Protestant nation? Not so fast. But let's take a couple looks at the effects of our Civil War. At the end of the Civil War, we're still divided by religion. This religious issue of a unified country under Catholicism or under Protestantism, it's not decided. The royal power has been severely weakened, right? Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III, they weren't strong leaders. Catherine de Medici, nobody likes her. That politique role eventually kind of comes back to bite her in the butt. Oh my God, I forgot to talk to you about Catherine de Medici. You should look it up. She also brings us the world into the knowledge of Nostradamus, but that's another side story, okay? The Valois, the last significant is the Valois dynasty is now gone, thus beginning into our course, the Bourbons. And when we speak of French monarchies as we move forward, the Bourbons are where they're at, okay? They will go until they get their heads cut off in the French Revolution, and then Napoleon comes along, and then the Bourbons come back, and then the Bourbon leaves again, right? But hey, from now on, at least through Christmas, or maybe into January, the French are going to be controlled by the Bourbons. All right. Last slide, I promise, and then I'm done. Okay? But what do we got to know about Henry IV of France? Henry IV of France. Henry of Navarre. Henry IV. Henry of Navarre. That's a name you have to know. That's a Henry you have to know. Okay? Why? Because he is the beginning of the Bourbon dynasty, and he is also the one that ends the French Civil War, right? And he does something very significant in the name of religion. When Henry takes the throne, he recognizes he's a politique. I'm a Bourbon. Remember that map that we looked at earlier in the week in class where, most of France is Catholic. The Huguenots are a minority religious group. Tradition says the King of France has always been Catholic, right? Henry's the King of France. He wants to stay the King of France. And so, if he says, if that means I have to convert to Catholicism, I'm totally going to convert to Catholicism, right? I'm a Bourbon and we're Calvinists, but what's more important than predestination and my soul into heaven? It's being the flipping King of France. That's what's more important, right? And so that's when he supposedly, as he converts, and he says, man, I'll kneel, I'll genuflect, I'll, listen to the Pope. Yeah, right. I'll do whatever I have to do, okay? And this is this phrase that's always associated with him is, hey, Paris is worth a mass. What he's saying there is, having control of Paris becoming king of France? If you want me to go to church, I'll go to church. If you want me to be Catholic, I'll be Catholic, right? How spiritually sincere is he? It doesn't matter, right? He's going to do whatever he has to do to become the king of France, right? That's a politique. The interest of the state comes first before any religious considerations, okay? Once he is there, he does recognize, though, that we have got to ease this religious tension. So he passes through, as the king of France, he passes this Edict of Nantes. This is another big one. At the beginning of this conversation, Peace of Augsburg. Got to know it. Now you need to know the Edict of Nantes, right? This grants religious rights to the Huguenots. Now, it's not everything that the Calvinists want. Think of it as it's religious toleration, not religious freedom. Catholicism is still the religion of the land, but Calvinists or Huguenots have the right to practice. Okay? We're going to stop this all-out execution of the Calvinists, right? So it is a step towards religious freedom. It's not universal religious freedom. You can't necessarily, let's say, Calvinism is as legal as, Calvinism, is not as legal as Catholicism, right? I think you guys got that on my first one. My coffee's almost out. Okay, so you need to know that. I'm going to wrap this up. You're going to get a lot of these treaties that you need to know. Okay, so that's our French Wars of Religion. I made it within 47 minutes, which, kind of amazing for me. Okay, so hopefully it helps put a picture. You're like, oh my God, Mr. Sherman, you talked about 47 seconds, which was like one column in our textbook. That's what I do. Okay, but you understand it, and I hope you can then use it to understand those key concepts. This is a great example that will help you understand those key concepts, and that will help you answer those learning objectives. Okay, we got another one coming up, right? There, I forgot that last bullet. Does not grant religious freedom for all. Okay, Lutherans, you don't get any rights in France. Anabaptists, stay up with your little fork on top of the meal. Okay, next time, our 30 Years' War. Ooh, it's a hoot. See ya. Thank you.